Hello and welcome to Meet the Author from RAPS, the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society. I'm Sean Schmidt, Senior Editor for Books. Today we're talking about the all-new third edition of the Medical Device Validation Handbook published by RAPS, which is available now in our online bookstore. With me now is Jay Crowley, who co-authored a chapter in the handbook titled FDA Unique Device Identification, Verification and Validation, a subject with which he's intimately familiar. Jay was with the FDA for 27 years, during which time he led the agency's efforts around unique device identification, or UDI, and he was front and center as the agency rolled out its UDI regulation in 2013. In fact, it was Jay who coined the term unique device identification, so who better to help write the chapter about that? Jay is currently VP of Medical Devices and UDI Practice Lead for USDM Life Sciences. He's also a RAPS member. Thanks for being with me, Jay.
Thanks, Sean. Great to be here.
So, Jay, we have lots to talk about on unique device identification. And you and I have been talking about it for a long time. I remember an article I wrote for a trade publication a decade ago, and you told me at the time, quote, "Sometimes people call me Mr. UDI. I think that name might stick for a while." So did the name stick? Are you still Mr. UDI?
I am. So even as we have continued on our UDI journey, you mentioned, of course, it's been a while since the U.S. rule, but there's still a lot of work going on, both in the U.S. and globally. So it's still all UDI all the time, whether anyone wants that or not. So it's yes, it has stuck, and some people call me the father of UDI. We can decide who the mother is at some other point, but it continues to be a very interesting, I think, enjoyable, intellectually enjoyable journey. But it is a journey that we're all still on, and so I appreciate the opportunity to continue to discuss it.
Now, as I mentioned, it's been 10 years since the FDA's UDI rule went into effect. So, what are some things that have maybe changed since then in the UDI space, and what hasn't?
Well, I think the goals haven't changed, right? So the notion that we would like a system to identify products so that we can conduct better recalls, understand what's happening with products that are on the market, better surveillance, all those kinds of issues that were some of the primary drivers for UDI. We could talk about some of the supply chain issues. We could certainly talk about the impact COVID had and our identification of alternate products. I mean, there were a lot of goals that we had for UDI and still have, I would say, for the use of this system for identification of devices. I think what has changed is our understanding of how hard it really is. I think when we went into this, and we spent a lot of time, as you might remember, Sean, this was not something that just popped up out of the blue. This was something that we spent years working on. Some of it because we wanted to understand it better. Some of it because it took a while for the rule to move through from draft to final, through all of the hurdles that one has to go through to get a regulation published. Um, but I think we've discovered that it's really just a lot harder. That the device world is very diverse. It encompasses just an enormous variety of products used in very different locations in very different ways. And so for some things it's fine. For some things I think it's relatively straightforward. We think about a lot of sterile products, a sterile catheter or sterile syringe, right? It's in a package, it has an identifier on it. It's all pretty straightforward. And then we think about X-ray systems or CT systems or anesthesia systems or ventilators and all the accessories associated with them, software, digital health, all of that's going on with that. And it just starts to become a very, very complicated problem for us to work through. And I believe that we are working through it, but it's certainly three-step forward, two back kind of operation at this point. So it's good. We've matured as any sort of endeavor does over time. People are still engaged and interested, which is great. And as I mentioned before, not just in the US, but globally. And So there's often a bit of conversation. What learnings can we take from the US as Europe is coming, Australia, China, Canada at some point, probably soon. So as you know, what learnings can we bring forward so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel? But it continues to be a journey as we understand not just kind of implementation, and I know we'll get into this probably a bit more, not just sort of initial implementation, but how do I manage this over time, right? Some devices have very, very long lives. And right, it's not a pill that I get, I go home and I take and that's it, right? You know, there's certain simplicity to the pharmaceutical space. In the device world, I'll have an infusion pump that is in a hospital for 15 years, but that pump will change a lot over time. So it's really that whole notion that I think we are still continuing to get our arms wrapped around and understand better.
Now, this is your first time working on a book with us here at RAP. So why did you decide to get involved with this particular one, this latest revision of the Medical Device Validation Handbook?
I think one of the issues that has become very obvious is our need to really understand the data that surrounds a product and how to manage that over time and understand that over time. And that's really, for me, a key activity, because I mean, we can assign identifiers to products and put them on labels of products and do all this kind of stuff. But if I don't have a robust, accurate data set to accompany that product, that can be verified and validated and all these kinds of things, then I really can't rely on, as other stakeholders in the ecosystem, I can't rely on that information. And that's become, I think, a critical conversation that we need to continue to have. How do we understand the data? How do we assess its accuracy? How do we verify it? How do we validate that it's the right data for the people who are trying to use it? Right, all those kinds of issues. So I think it's an important time to refocus on these topics. And really start to have that conversation. People, as we mentioned, right, the UDI rule came, there was phased implementation, and I think some people think we're done with it, and we're not. You know, and coming back to this data question, I think is very important, and that's why I really wanted to be part of this chapter, be part of this book, and really help people to understand how critical it is and what they can do to address it.
Okay, so tell us what's new in this revised chapter on FDA's expectations around unique device identification. What's the difference between the second edition and this new third edition when it comes to UDI verification and validation activities?
I think a lot of it is, again, really around the data and the need to not just sort of collect data in the abstract, right? Go and figure out what I need, but to really make sure that your data is aligned, both across various documents that you might have, a label, IFU, what you put into Good ID, but across your organization as well, right? The chapter already did this, but I think it's also important to emphasize that UDI touches lots of parts of the organization. And so making sure that we have activities in place, controls in place, process controls in place that assure that we're all, I say, singing from the same song sheet, right? That what I say about this product, whether it is for information for the label, information for the IFU, information for Good ID, information for a recall, information for an adverse event, that we're all saying the same thing. Because if we're not, then we're really going to struggle to see the benefits that I previously mentioned, to see the benefits that we're really after. So I really think that's a driving factor that, for many of me included, I don't think we really appreciated how really invasive this was going to be for an organization, how endemic the view had to be in order to make this work.
Now, you talked about data a moment ago, and there was a line in the chapter that caught my eye. It said, data gathering is, quote, one of the hardest tasks in implementing UDI. And we're going to talk about the implementation process for a moment, but let's kind of like start there since you just mentioned data. Why is collecting data for UDI such a stumbling block for many device manufacturers?
Well, and the reason that's important, I think, is not just sort of on the face of it that it's hard, but because it wasn't what we thought was going to be hard, right? When we started this, did all this work and developed the rule and developed good ID, we really thought that some of the barcoding packaging issues were going to be the hardest thing. Turns out that there's a lot of technology, right? Lots of other industries that do barcoding. So, that turned out to be something that had to be addressed, but was addressable. The challenge on the data side is that I haven't had to, as a manufacturer, collect this data before. I don't necessarily have it as discrete data elements. Yes, I created some data when I made a label. So I have to go look at the label to know what the product actually is, right? There's this, and these siloed activities, right? Maybe there was some pre-market submission, a 510K, some information went into a PDF that went to FDA. Okay, now I have to go look in that PDF to figure out what is it that I said the product is, what the name of it, whether it's sterile, how it gets reprocessed, right? Some of these issues that existed in little bits and pieces here and there, but didn't necessarily, or didn't for many organizations, exist as discrete data elements that I could then do something with. They were spread out in all these different systems. We literally had people walking around with spreadsheets, filling out, look at label, look at an IFU, look at a pre-market submission, look in your PLM system, right? To find out what it is that I need to collect in order to submit it to FDA. So it just turned out to be not a straightforward process. If I had all this data in one location, if my, and some people have done this or are doing it, created robust data sets, say in their PLM system or in some PIM system, then it's pretty easy, right? Maybe I need to do some translation of the data to put in the right format and send it off. It's fine. But that's not where most people were. It was spread out all over the place, different people with different responsibilities, maybe different parts of the organization even having a different understanding of what that data attribute meant. And so there needed to be, okay, we need to kind of come together and figure out what it is as an organization we believe the answer to this data attribute question is. So and that challenge continues. I mean, that's, I say that and the book sort of says it is or was, but it continues to be over time, not only sort of from a basic data management perspective, but as new data needs come along. So it's not like I have a static data set. That data set is growing, and not just from a US perspective, but globally. Different people, different organizations, different use cases demand a slightly different data set. So I have to constantly, if you will, create and manage data across the organization in a way that then allows me to convey that information, to pass that information along to whomever needs it, right? So we have commercial, we have regulatory, right? So it's really a very it's really a massive challenge, and actually it's what I spend the most time working on now is really helping companies to sort of understand how they need to think about this, and really sort of turn themselves around. And it's very, very hard. Again, to something I said before, companies haven't had to think about data this way, right? So they're not predisposed to it, right? They're not set up to do that. So, sort of getting your head straight, getting your mind right, so that you can do this is really a continuing challenge.
Yeah.
And there's no easy. It's not like I can go buy something off the shelf and boom, I'm done and move on, right? It's particularly if you have an organization of any size. Again, I've got different people with different responsibilities, different views of the world that all need to sort of come together to make sense out of all of it.
Okay, let's talk about for a few moments the UDI implementation process. Now, your chapter in the Medical Device Validation Handbook, third edition, it talks about how device labelers should put in place an implementation team, develop strategic plans and schedules, and more. Walk us through that process a bit.
So it's certainly not a one size fits all. And one of the questions sort of, you can come at this a couple of different ways, but one of the questions we often get is, well, who should own this? Right? Where does this reside? And different organizations really will come at this differently. So sometimes it's a sort of a regulatory affairs kind of thing. Maybe it's a RAQA, maybe it's a product owner, maybe it's more of an IT thing. So, but somebody, just like any endeavor, somebody needs to be in charge, right? So somebody needs to lead the team. And everyone needs to understand that it is a team. It is something that's going to develop and continue over time. And someone needs to be a point person. Someone needs to lead this with other people engaged and involved. And then you can start to, depending on your organization, how you're set up. And one of the things that has surprised me more than anything since leaving FDA is how different companies are, right? There is not, you would think the medical device industry, right? People move around. You would think maybe, and this company gets sold and bought by this other company, whatever. You would think that there would be sort of a general way in which companies operate, and nothing could be farther from the truth. So, for your organization, you just need to decide, okay, and the chapter goes into some of the tasks, but it's really deciding who's going to lead this, what the team is going to be, who's going to have what responsibility, and making sure that that really gets established. Right, those responsibilities are not a one and done kind of thing. Change management, all these kinds of things really need to be well established, well understood, and everyone. The part that I really focus on is everyone needs visibility. Right? This is not something that's done over here and no one knows what's going on because of the way that it touches all parts of the organization. People really need company-wide visibility into what's going on. And I think that's, if you can start with some of those premises, a lead, a team, visibility, the who does what, it can vary. And certainly the chapter goes into some details about some of the tasks. But it's more, I think the critical success factor here really is making sure that you have a for your organization a robust process that will continue to drive forward, even as new countries come on, new products come on, people come and go. I often new client, why do you do this? I don't know. I've been here 2 years. I don't know why we do that way. Does anyone know? Is there a document, right? Really getting some of this stuff nailed down is really important, so that as the organization grows and evolves and people come and go, that there is continuity to it. And that's, I think, the most important part, because otherwise you're just reinventing the wheel each time something new comes along. And that's just painful and difficult and expensive.
Okay, let's talk about compliance for a bit. How does UDI non-compliance with the FDA UDI rule look now compared to maybe 5 years ago? Is the FDA handing out more warning letters to firms now than they used to that include UDI citations?
So 5 years ago, I mean, FDA, to their credit, really took a we want to make this work kind of approach. And so they really, they have a very robust help desk, right? They're really trying to help companies. Spent a lot of time when I was there. I spent a lot of time, people who have come and gone, still there since I've left, really spent a lot of time with companies trying to help them understand what to do. And so 5 years ago, there probably were no warning letters. Now there are warning letters. Now FDA is like, okay, we've gone through this process. It took a long time, a lot of guidance, a lot of help. Now you need to be compliant. And if you're not, why not? So there are there have been a couple of different things that have happened, but there are certainly a number of warning letters that have been published where companies have not implemented UDI. It's not part of their QMS, right? There are a couple of different things that have gone on. So
Yeah.
it's certainly part of regular inspections. FDA is looking now at something I touched on before, really how the data aligns, right? What are you saying in your registration and listing versus what are you saying in good ID versus what are you saying in a recall versus what are you saying in an adverse event report? So FDA is looking at all of this and going, why doesn't this match? Or this should match and it's not. Is there a reason it's not matching? Do we not understand something about you or your products or how we're managing the data? So companies will do get, letters from FDA, emails typically from FDA. Why does this not match? Why is this not right? Why does this not match up with this other thing over here? And companies now have to look at that and go, and I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong, but you really need to look at it to understand what right is and how that should look to FDA. So I think that whole process continues. So those two arms in particular continue, part of regular, right, FDA visits are looking at, there's a whole compliance policy guide associated with that, but then also looking at the data and understanding where there are disconnects. Are those disconnects a sign of a problem from FDA's end? Is that a problem from industry's end? How do we fix these disconnects? Because we really, as I said before, FDA also believes, they might not use this term, they want to sing from the same song sheet, right? They want to be sure that people understand if there is a recall that we're all talking about the product in the same way. So, that those two activities I think will continue, but I know will continue from FDA's end.
What about other key takeaways from this chapter that you co-authored?
I think there's the thing which is interesting to me is the need to manage all of this over time, right? Companies get very caught up, understandably, in bringing a product to market, right? So I do this, I do that, I get some data, I submit my 510K, maybe a PMA, more likely a 510K, and I get my product able to be commercialized, and whoo, and then I go focus on something else, right? And it's understandable, right? I'm not diminishing that part of the industry, but most of those devices continue to exist in some form for a very long time, and someone needs to be cognizant of that, manage those changes, communicate those changes, understand when those changes create the need for a new device identifier or updates to data or changes in packaging or what have you. And so sort of focusing back on that less exciting process of change management, I think is really a critical part of, right? So we talk about process controls. What does that really mean, right? And this is a big part of it, is all those processes that are interrelated, that are associated to change management. I mean, I'm using that term kind of in a broad way. Different companies have different terms, which always makes life a little interesting. But generally speaking, that the product will change over time. There's no doubt. Sometimes there's a new 510K, sometimes there's not. PMA supplements, sometimes not, right? But even for lower risk class 1 products that don't go through that process, they still have, many of these things have been around a long time in some form or another. And understanding that and managing that and having that visibility and sharing that visibility and having the controls in place to know how to do that, I think is that's what separates, right? That's what separates the people who do this well from the people who don't, right? And so I think it's fine, new product, everyone is hyper focused. I can get that done, fine, right? And even from a UDI perspective, great. But this is a right. This is we have a long view here, and so really managing, having the controls in place, whether they're sort of IT controls or process controls or a combination of the two, are really important to make sure that we're staying true to the purpose here.
Yeah. So, give us some insight into your process for revising this UDI chapter in the medical device validation handbook.
I think it was really those two pieces. It was the realization that we were very good at implementing UDI. We weren't really good at managing it over time. And so really looking at the role of change management and how that really fit in with the rest of the process, and really, it's almost right, this sort of do loop kind of thing. And the data issue, right? Really yes, we knew data was hard. I think it's even a lot harder than we thought originally, mostly because a lot of companies really are global, right? So yes, okay, maybe I had a strategy for US. What am I doing as I'm rolling my products out globally? So it takes something that was hard and makes it exponentially more difficult. So those two pieces, which to me are sort of interrelated, were really the drivers for updates to the chapter, really making sure that we reminded or brought to people's attention the need to deal with those two issues in a very systemic way. And that, right, yeah, I will often go into a company and well, who updates the data in Good ID? I don't
Yeah.
know. That person left 3 years ago who put the data in originally. They can't even get into their account. So the whole notion of managing change, keeping up with things is just may not be there to the degree that it needs to be. And so really refocusing people on the need to make sure that is part of the broader controls and the broader process that they have in play.
Yeah. Well, obviously this book is a must read for regulatory and quality professionals, but are there others in the device industry who would benefit from reading this book?
The interesting thing about UDI, and I think we knew this sort of intuitively, but it's really become clearer as we work through it, is that it really not only touches, but can benefit so many other parts of the organization. We focus kind of somewhat myopically on some of the regulatory activities, again, sort of UDI, from a strict, 801, 830 perspective, but also adverse event reporting and recalls and these kinds of things. But there's also a lot of commercial benefits, supply chain benefits, distribution control benefits, right? A lot of other, when you look at other industries and what they do and how they manage product, there's a lot that we can have learned, are trying to integrate into the conversation so that I can take advantage of this effort. So, another way to look at this, or another way to talk about this, is, okay, you've gone through the trouble of implementing UDI, you've put barcodes on your labels and on your packages, and you have data that you are maintaining in some system that you've also put in Good ID. Do something with it, right? Use it for orders, use it for fulfillment, use it for supply chain, right? Use it for some of these things that might not be truly just regulatory in nature, that other parts of your organization can benefit from and leverage and improve their visibility. I mean, we've certainly seen a lot of companies and not a very efficient parts of the organization that could benefit from leveraging something that is there because they have gone through the trouble of doing it. So I would, there's really anyone who touches the product or any documentation associated with the product can benefit from at least a look at the chapter to understand what all the pieces are and maybe how they fit together.
And before we close here, maybe looking a bit more broadly over the entire book, tell us maybe what you think someone will get out of purchasing the third edition of this handbook. Why should they buy it?
We often work with companies that either have not been medical device companies before, maybe they were in some consumer products and they're migrating to medical devices, um, or they're small and they're sort of starting to grow. And one of the for me one of the critical pieces that differentiates medical product manufacturers, I mean, even broader than medical devices, but at least medical device manufacturers from other manufacturing operations, is really the level of control that needs to be in play, right? It's not just sort of this notion of quality management systems and some SOPs here and there, but really the need to have in place documented, verifiable controls, and that whole notion, which I think we kind of take for granted because we've kind of grown up in this space and right, heard it and talked about it and understand it and see how the pieces fit together. But for a lot of people who haven't come from this space, who don't understand, maybe they came from a consumer company, maybe it's a consumer company turning into a regulated product company, really understanding why this is so important and what it means. People get, a lot of companies get in trouble because they don't appreciate the level of control and documentation that is needed in order to be successful in this space, right? When and somebody shows up, FDA knocks on your door, or some other, depending on what country you're in and how you're managing quality management system, having these processes in place, these controls in place, the documentation that's necessary, and the ongoing nature of that's what separates those that operate in the medical product space from others. And I'm not, again, not trying to be pejorative. I'm not suggesting that people in other industries don't know what they're doing, but that, certainly chemical industries and there's some other industries that are also equally have the same kind of level of focus on control. But that's really, I think, the critical factor here is understanding why this is important, how it fits together, and what you as a device manufacturer and everyone in that organization has a role in that. Clearly, RAQA has a leadership role, but everyone in that organization plays a part in that play and needs to understand why it's important and how their participation in that activity supports the goals of the organization.
Yeah. Well, Jay, thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us today. I do appreciate it.
My pleasure. It was great to talk with you as always, Sean, and look forward to another conversation somewhere down the road.